Iran opened the Strait of Hormuz yesterday, and then this morning they closed it again. In less than 24 hours, every headline that said deal close, every market that surged, every anchor who told you the war was ending, all of it evaporated. And I want you to stay with me for the next few minutes, because what happened this morning is not a plot twist. It is not a surprise. It is the most predictable thing that could have happened in this entire conflict. And I told you it was coming, not yesterday, not last week, months ago, before any of this started. Because when you understand the actual structure of this situation, and not the headlines, not the politics, not the Twitter posts, when you understand the game theory underneath all of it, there was only one possible outcome. And that outcome is exactly what you are watching right now. Here's what I want you to hold on to before we go any further. Ships are turning around in the Persian Gulf as we speak. One tanker stopped transmitting its location entirely. It just went dark somewhere in the Arabian Sea. The IRGC did not call America's blockade a military action. They did not call it economic pressure. They called it piracy, maritime robbery. Those are their exact words. And somewhere in a briefing room in Beijing, a group of people who spent the last 10 years designing precisely this outcome are reading those headlines completely unsurprised. Because this moment, this exact moment, is what they built everything for. So let me tell you the story that nobody in mainstream coverage is telling you correctly. And I mean nobody. Because every major network right now is covering this as a US-Iran story, a bilateral conflict. Two players, maximum pressure meets regional defiance. And that framing is not just incomplete. It is analytically wrong. This is a three-player game. And the third player, the one that almost every Western anchor is refusing to put at the center of the story, built the entire board that everyone else is playing on. That player is China. And once I show you what China built over the last decade, you will never again be surprised by anything Iran does in this conflict or any conflict that comes after it. Let me start with the question that should be exploding in every newsroom right now, but is not. Iran has absorbed 50 days of the most intensive American bombing campaign since the Gulf War. Its supreme leader was killed on the first day of fighting. 13 of its military bases are partially or heavily paralyzed. Its central bank warned internally, in its own documents, that economic recovery could take 12 years. The Iranian rial lost 15% of its value in a single month. Iran fired fewer missiles in the final week of this campaign than it did in the first. By every conventional metric, this is a country that should be on its knees asking for terms, and yet this morning, Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz again, confidently, without flinching, and called America a pirate. How does a country in that position do that? What is the structural foundation of that confidence? Because it is not stubbornness. It is not ideology. It is not some mystical Iranian resilience that commentators reach for when they cannot explain something. It is architecture, physical, financial, military architecture built by China quietly over a decade. I call it the decade of quiet, and I want to walk you through exactly what it is, because this framework will explain everything you are going to watch unfold over the next 72 hours. It starts in 2018 when Trump pulled the United States out of the nuclear deal and reimposed maximum pressure sanctions on Iran. At that moment, China made a decision. A quiet decision, not announced, not signed in any treaty, not celebrated in any press conference. China decided it would become Iran's economic lifeline. And the reason China made that decision has nothing to do with friendship or shared values. China imports approximately 1/3 of its oil through the Strait of Hormuz. Its entire industrial economy runs on energy that flows through a 33-kilometer corridor that America has historically controlled. And China calculated, correctly as it turns out, that if America ever fully weaponized that control, China's economy would be in serious danger. So China built a parallel system, rung by rung, layer by layer, designed specifically so that if this moment ever came, if America ever tried to use a blockade to economically collapse Iran, the collapse would not happen. The first layer is the payment architecture. China began buying Iranian oil in Chinese yuan, bypassing the SWIFT financial network entirely. SWIFT is the global messaging system that connects banks and enables dollar-denominated international payments. American sanctions work by cutting countries out of SWIFT. If you cannot receive dollars, you cannot pay for imports, you cannot fund your military, you cannot function in the modern global economy. China's yuan payment system for Iranian oil runs completely outside of that. The money never touches the dollar system. America cannot sanction what it cannot see. The second layer is the dark fleet. China's shadow tanker network spent a decade perfecting techniques for moving Iranian oil invisibly. Ships that turn off their tracking transponders, ships that fly the flags of landlocked countries to disguise their origin, ship-to-ship transfers in international waters near Malaysia, where Iranian crude gets mixed with other oil, relabeled as Malaysian, and delivered to Chinese refineries that process sanctioned oil without documentation. China's official customs records show zero imports from Iran since 2022, and yet China's recorded imports of Malaysian crude reached 1.3 million barrels per day last year. That is more than double Malaysia's entire oil production. That oil was Iranian. The paperwork said Malaysian. The system worked. The third layer is strategic reserves. China entered this war sitting on approximately 1.2 billion barrels of crude oil in storage, built over 2 years by quietly buying Iranian and Russian oil at heavily discounted prices. When Hormuz closed and global oil prices spiked above $120 per barrel, China did not panic. Its markets stayed stable. Its refineries kept running. The energy shock that America designed to force Iran to its knees did not reach China. China had prepared for it. While Europe scrambled and the International Energy Agency warned about jet fuel shortages, China had 4 months of supply cover sitting in warehouses. And then the fourth layer, the one that most people are still not fully reporting on, China's satellites. A satellite built by Chinese company EarthEye, acquired by the IRGC in late 2024, resolution of 0.5 meter per pixel, 10 times sharper than Iran's own best satellite, monitoring Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia, monitoring the U.S. Fifth Fleet in Bahrain, monitoring American positions across the entire region, feeding targeting data in real time to Iranian strike systems, connected with Russian satellite intelligence, creating what one American military analyst described as a zone of 500 to 1,000 miles around Iran, where if you can be seen, you can be targeted. And America cannot destroy those satellites without starting a direct war with China. This is the decade of quiet. Payment systems, dark fleets, strategic reserves, satellite networks. China never announced any of it. China never held a summit about it. China simply built it. And this morning, when Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz again and called America a pirate, Iran did it standing on the foundation that China spent 10 years constructing underneath it. Now, I want to steelman the American position because I think you should always test the argument you are making against its strongest opposition. And the American argument is not nothing. The blockade is creating real pain inside Iran. The rial is collapsing. The central bank's own internal documents say 12 years to recovery. Iran fired fewer missiles in the final week of fighting than the first. America has turned back over 10 ships at the blockade. It expanded boarding authority across the entire Arabian Sea. Defense Secretary Hegseth confirmed publicly that America is reloading, more firepower than it had at the start. The diplomatic pressure through Pakistan, Turkey, Egypt, Saudi Arabia is sustained and real. Trump reportedly offered $20 billion in frozen Iranian assets. Iran started at 27. America started at 6. The number 20 billion is a real number from real negotiations. Movement was happening, and history is on America's side in a narrow sense. Maximum pressure sometimes works. Libya in 2003, South Africa in the 1980s, the argument that sustained, overwhelming pressure eventually breaks resistance is not empty. It has precedent. But here is what that argument misses. And this is the most important analytical distinction I can give you today. The argument confuses pain with collapse. These are not the same thing. Pain means a country is suffering. Collapse means a country cannot function. The distance between those two things is exactly what China's decade of quiet was designed to create. China's payment systems, dark fleet, and strategic reserves did not prevent the pain. Iran is in pain, but they prevented the collapse. Iran still has oil revenue flowing, not at pre-war levels, but enough. Iran still has the structural support to keep making choices rather than being forced to make them. Iran still has enough economic oxygen to decide when to open Hormuz, when to close it, when to negotiate, and when to walk away. That is the difference. Trump spent 50 days trying to force Iran to a decision. Iran is making its own decisions. And the distance between those two things, that gap, is China. So what happens now? Because this morning is not an ending. It is a signal. And I want to read it carefully. There are 3 structural possibilities from this point. The first is that the economic pressure finally crosses the threshold before the ceasefire expires and Iran accepts a deal. The math on that deal is already visible. $20 billion in frozen assets. Iran keeps some form of practical authority over Hormuz. Not legal sovereignty, not formal control, but ships must coordinate with Iranian forces. Ships must follow Iranian designated routes. The IRGC remains present in the strait. Iran calls it managed navigation. America calls it freedom of navigation. Both sides are describing different versions of the same reality. Both sides declare victory. This is not impossible. The Pakistan, Egypt, Turkey, Saudi diplomatic framework is actively working toward exactly this outcome. The second possibility is that talks fail again. The ceasefire expires with no deal. America faces the choice it has been avoiding: escalate or find a face-saving exit. And here's what makes a second round of bombing structurally different from the first. During this ceasefire, satellite images of Iranian base locations showed front-end loaders and dump trucks operating around the clock. Iran used the pause in fighting to dig out its missile cities. The underground bunker networks buried in the mountains. Half of Iran's missile launchers remain intact, buried but not destroyed. China supplied tunnel boring machines specifically designed to help clear blocked tunnels. Russia supplied technologies essential for integrated air defense wrapped inside what was officially called humanitarian aid. The IRGC Aerospace Force commander said publicly, on the record, that its finger is on the trigger and it is in full readiness. If bombing resumes, America may find that the second phase of this war is significantly more expensive than the first. The third possibility, and this is the one I think China is actively engineering, is an extended ceasefire that gradually becomes a permanent reality without ever being called a formal deal. China has been in daily diplomatic contact with both sides throughout this entire conflict. Wang Yi called Tehran directly. That single phone call produced Iran's announcement that Hormuz would open. China and Pakistan delivered a 5-point peace initiative together. China and Russia coordinated throughout. Lavrov flew to Beijing. They confirmed their relationship was, in their words, unshakable amid any storms. China's strategic interest is not in either side winning decisively. China's interest is in a stable Hormuz, a surviving Iran, and a demonstrated precedent, visible to every country on earth, that American blockades cannot function without Chinese cooperation to end them. If China can produce an indefinite ceasefire that nobody ever formally calls a peace agreement, that serves China better than any other outcome. Iran survives, Hormuz reopens, China's oil flows, and the permanent historical record shows that the world's most strategically important maritime choke point was resolved when China's foreign minister made a phone call, not when America imposed a blockade. Watch what China does not say in the next 72 hours, because in this story, silence is the loudest signal there is. Here is where I want to leave you. I said Iran would never give up Hormuz on America's terms. I said it because the game theory made it the only logical conclusion. A country does not voluntarily surrender the one thing that makes it strategically relevant. And Iran's structural ability to refuse was never about Iranian willpower. It was about Chinese infrastructure. 10 years of patient, invisible, deliberate construction, payment systems outside the dollar, a shadow fleet that moved oil invisibly while official records showed nothing, strategic reserves that absorbed the energy shock that was supposed to break the Iranian economy, satellite networks that gave Iranian forces eyes on American positions across the entire region, tunnel boring machines, cargo aircraft landing in Tehran, carrying equipment valued in the billions. All of it built quietly while Washington was focused elsewhere. This morning, Iran closed Hormuz again. In 24 hours, it demonstrated everything I said about the structural foundations of this conflict. Not because Iran is stronger than America. Iran is not stronger than America in any conventional military sense. But because China spent a decade making sure that American strength, however overwhelming, could not translate into the specific outcome America was trying to force. The ceasefire expires in 3 days. The second round of talks has no confirmed date. Iran's parliament speaker said the rules of Hormuz will be determined on the battlefield. Trump says Iran has agreed to everything. Iran says Trump's claims are false. Ships are turning around in the Persian Gulf. And somewhere in Beijing, in a room full of people who spent years designing exactly this outcome, nobody is surprised by any of it. That is what happens when one side plays the long game and the other side plays the news cycle. And here's the question I want to leave you with, because it is the question that should keep you up at night regardless of how this particular conflict ends. If China spent an entire decade quietly building the architecture that gave Iran the ability to refuse America's terms in this war, payment systems, shadow fleets, satellites, tunnel machines, what is China building right now, today, quietly, for the next crisis? Because the decade of quiet did not end with this war. It is still running. And whatever China is constructing in the next 10 years will determine the next moment exactly like this one. Except by the time that moment arrives, it will already be too late to be surprised by it.